What if I told you that sometimes the most powerful people in the world become invisible by choice? That a billionaire CEO could disappear into the very company he built, becoming just another face in the crowd of workers he's never truly known. Marcus Thompson thought he understood his empire. He thought quarterly reports and executive briefings gave him the complete picture of Thompson Industries. But on a cold Tuesday morning in Chicago, sitting in his glass-walled penthouse office 40 floors above the city, he discovered that the most important stories in his company were the ones nobody dared tell him directly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other. Marcus arrived at 6:30 a.m., as he had for the past 15 years, moving through the familiar routine that had built his tech empire from a garage startup to a billion-dollar corporation. The elevator whisked him silently to the top floor, past dozens of levels filled with employees whose faces he recognized, but whose names remained mysteries. His corner office commanded a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a world of glass towers and endless possibility. Marcus settled behind his mahogany desk with coffee and the morning reports. Revenue projections, market analysis, competitive intelligence, the daily flood of data that kept Thompson Industries ahead of the curve. At 45, he had built something remarkable from nothing, just like his father always said he could. But his father never lived to see the empire his son created. Robert Thompson died on a factory floor, collapsed from the stress and harassment that came with being the only black supervisor in a plant full of workers who never accepted his authority. The knock on his office door came at exactly 8:15 a.m. Jennifer Williams, his head of human resources, stood in the doorway with a thick manila folder and an expression that made Marcus's coffee taste subtly bitter. "We need to talk about something serious," Jennifer said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Something that's been building for months, and frankly, I'm running out of options." Jennifer had worked for Thompson Industries for 12 years, climbing from an entry-level HR coordinator to the head of the department through competence, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to fairness. She was one of the few executives who would bring Marcus problems without sugarcoating them, which made her expression all the more concerning. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked, setting aside his morning reports. Jennifer opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents that looked disturbingly official. Discrimination complaints, hostile work environment reports, anonymous submissions through our ethics hotline, all coming from the same source, our janitorial and facilities maintenance staff. Marcus's stomach tightened. How many complaints are we talking about? 17 formal complaints in the past 6 months, dozens more informal reports, all describing the same pattern of behavior: verbal harassment, discriminatory treatment, intimidation tactics, and retaliation against anyone who speaks up. Jennifer spread several documents across his desk. The complaints consistently named Brad Sullivan in facilities management as the primary perpetrator, with Frank Morrison, the building superintendent, either participating or turning a blind eye. Marcus studied the papers, seeing his employees' pain translated into clinical HR language. Descriptions of racial slurs disguised as jokes, comments about workers' immigration status, different standards applied based on skin color or accent, the kind of workplace toxicity that created exactly the environment that had killed his father. "What's been done about these complaints?" Jennifer's expression grew frustrated. "Official investigations, interviews, documentation reviews, but here's the problem. Most of our complainants are undocumented workers or visa holders who are terrified of retaliation. They won't speak on record. The ones who do come forward suddenly find their work schedules cut or their employment terminated for performance issues. Sullivan and Morrison have been careful to avoid creating obvious evidence." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, the familiar rage that came whenever he encountered the kind of systematic oppression his father had faced. "So we know there's a problem, but we can't prove it legally." "Exactly. And meanwhile, the hostile environment continues. Just last week, Rosa Martinez, she's been with us for 8 years, stellar employee record, came to me in tears after Sullivan made comments about her accent during a staff meeting. She's scared to file a formal complaint because she needs this job to support her daughter. Marcus stood and walked to his window, looking down at the city where millions of people went to work every day, hoping to be treated with basic dignity. Somewhere in the building below him, employees were suffering the kind of harassment that no one should endure, the same harassment that had broken his father's spirit and, ultimately, his heart. Jennifer, I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you think this is happening in other parts of the company? I think Sullivan's department is the worst, but power corrupts everywhere. When managers know they can get away with treating certain workers poorly, the behavior spreads. It becomes part of the culture. Marcus turned back to her, his mind already working through possibilities. What would it take to get concrete evidence, the kind that would stand up in court and justify immediate action?
Jennifer hesitated. We'd need witnesses willing to testify, video or audio evidence of discriminatory behavior, or someone with direct access to document the pattern systematically. But Marcus, anyone we send in officially would be recognized immediately. Sullivan isn't stupid. He's been getting away with this because he knows how to play the game. The idea formed in Marcus's mind with startling clarity. Dangerous, unprecedented, but potentially the only way to get the truth his company needed. What if someone went in unofficially? Someone Sullivan wouldn't recognize as a threat. You mean an undercover investigation? That's complex. We'd need someone who could blend in completely, someone Sullivan would never suspect of having any connection to upper management. Jennifer paused, studying Marcus's expression. Please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Marcus returned to his desk, mind racing through the logistics. How many people in this company have actually seen me in person? I mean, really seen me, not just glimpsed me in the elevator or walking through the lobby. Maybe 50 people, total? You've always been extremely private about your personal appearances. Most employees wouldn't recognize you if they passed you on the street. Jennifer's voice carried growing alarm. Marcus, you can't be serious about this. I've never been more serious about anything. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found his daughter's number. Sarah needs to be part of this conversation. 10 minutes later, Sarah Thompson sat in her father's office, her expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and grudging admiration. At 28, she had inherited Marcus's strategic mind and unwavering ethical compass, along with an MBA from Wharton and 7 years of experience working her way up through the Thompson Industries from the ground floor. Dad, I understand the impulse, but this is incredibly risky. If this goes wrong, it could destroy everything you've built. The media coverage alone would be devastating. And if we don't act, we're allowing the same kind of systematic harassment that killed your grandfather to continue in our own company. I didn't build Thompson Industries to perpetuate the problems I grew up fighting against. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her business mind already working through contingencies. Okay, hypothetically, how would this work? You can't just show up as a new janitor without proper documentation, background checks, references. Jennifer opened her laptop. Actually, creating a false identity for internal purposes wouldn't be that difficult. We control our own HR systems, our own background check processes. I could create employment records for Mike Thompson. Distant enough name that it wouldn't raise suspicions, but memorable enough for you to respond naturally. Mike Thompson. Marcus mused. I like it. What about my appearance? Sullivan has to believe I'm just another worker. You'll need to change your look completely, Sarah said, warming to the strategic challenge despite her reservations. Cheaper clothes, different posture, maybe grow some facial hair. The key is making yourself invisible in the way that service workers often are to management types. Marcus felt the plan crystallizing in his mind. How long would I need to maintain the cover? Long enough to document a pattern of behavior, build relationships with the affected workers, and gather evidence that would justify immediate action. Probably several weeks minimum, maybe longer if Sullivan is as careful as these reports suggest. Sarah stood and began pacing. a habit she'd inherited from her father. The logistics of manageable, but Dad, you need to understand what you're really signing up for. You'll be working night shifts, probably making minimum wage, dealing with the kind of disrespect you haven't experienced since you were young and poor. Are you prepared for that psychological adjustment? Marcus thought about his father, about the countless workers who endured daily humiliation because they had no choice, no power, no voice. I'm prepared for whatever it takes to clean up our company. Then we'll need to plan this carefully. Background story, work history, references, even an address in the right neighborhood. Every detail has to be perfect. And I'll coordinate with legal to ensure anything we discover can be used in employment actions. We'll also need a communication protocol that maintains your cover while keeping me updated on your safety. Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. In a few days, he would transform from one of Chicago's most successful businessmen into an invisible janitor walking among his own employees as a stranger. It was risky, unconventional, and potentially the most important thing he'd ever done. One more thing, he said, looking at both women. This investigation doesn't just end with Sullivan. If we find systemic problems, we address them throughout the entire organization. Thompson Industries is going to become the kind of company where every worker is treated with dignity, regardless of their position. Jennifer and Sarah exchanged glances, recognizing the determination in Marcus's voice that had built an empire from nothing. "When do we start?" Jennifer asked.
Marcus smiled, but there was steel in his expression. Mike Thompson starts work Monday night. The transformation began at 4:30 p.m. on a Monday afternoon in Marcus Thompson's private bathroom, 40 floors above the streets of Chicago. The man who looked back at him from the mirror bore little resemblance to the billionaire CEO who had built Thompson Industries from nothing. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by dark blue work pants and a matching shirt with Thompson Industries facilities embroidered on the chest. The Italian leather shoes had been swapped for sturdy work boots. A baseball cap covered his hair, and 3 days of carefully cultivated stubble changed the angles of his face. But the most dramatic transformation was in his posture. Marcus had spent years carrying himself with the confidence of success, shoulders back, chin up, moving through the world like someone accustomed to deference and respect. Now he practiced the subtle hunching of shoulders that came from years of feeling invisible, the slightly downcast eyes of someone who had learned not to draw attention. It was a performance based on memory, from the days before his tech empire existed, when he had worked these same kinds of jobs to survive. The service elevator carried him to the building's lower level, past floors of offices where his executives were finishing their workdays. At 10:30 p.m., the building felt different. The corporate energy of daytime had been replaced by the quiet efficiency of the skeleton crew that kept the physical plant running. Marcus, now Mike Thompson, checked in with the night security guard and received his assignment. The facilities office was a cramped space in the building's basement, fluorescent lights humming over metal desks and scheduling boards. A handful of workers in identical uniforms gathered for the night shift briefing. Marcus studied their faces, realizing with uncomfortable clarity that he had never seen any of them before, despite the fact that they had been maintaining his building for years. "Looks like we got a new guy," called out a voice from behind a scheduling clipboard. Brad Sullivan emerged from a back office, and Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Sullivan was exactly what he'd expected, mid-40s, soft around the middle, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from having just enough authority to make other people's lives difficult. His uniform was crisper than everyone else's, his posture that of someone who enjoyed being the boss. "Mike Thompson," Marcus said, extending his hand with the deferent friendliness of someone who needed this job. Sullivan's handshake was brief and dismissive, his eyes already cataloging Marcus as just another worker. "You got any experience with commercial building maintenance?" "Some, sir. Mostly smaller buildings, but I learned fast." "Uh-huh." Sullivan consulted his clipboard with theatrical importance. "Rosa, you'll show the new guy around tonight. Start him on the basic rotation. Offices, bathrooms, common areas. Nothing complicated until we see what he can handle."
A woman stepped forward from the group, and Marcus immediately understood why her name had appeared in so many HR complaints. Rosa Martinez was probably in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. There was dignity in her bearing despite the circumstances, the kind of quiet strength that Marcus had seen in his own mother years ago. "Come on, Mike," Rosa said with a slight accent that spoke of origins elsewhere. "I'll show you where everything is." As they walked through the building service corridors, Rosa proved to be an excellent teacher. She explained the cleaning protocols with professional precision, showed him where supplies were stored, and pointed out the quirks of various floors and offices. But Marcus noticed other things too. The way she automatically stepped aside when they encountered anyone in business attire, the practiced invisibility that came from years of being background scenery in other people's workplaces. "You got kids?" asked Rosa as they loaded cleaning supplies onto a cart for the 15th floor. "No, ma'am, just me." Marcus had rehearsed his cover story, but found himself genuinely curious about Rosa's life. "What about you?" Rosa's face lit up with obvious pride. "One daughter, Sophia. She's 15, honor-roll student, wants to be a doctor." Her expression grew more serious. "That's why this job matters so much to me, you know? Sophia's future depends on me keeping steady work." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Marcus learning the rhythms of commercial cleaning, while Rosa shared quiet insights about office politics and building management. It was during their break, sitting in the small employee lounge, that Marcus got his first direct taste of what Jennifer's complaints had been describing. Brad Sullivan appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud, his expression announcing that he was looking for someone to blame for something. "Rosa, I got complaints about the executive washroom on 22. Someone said it wasn't properly stocked yesterday morning." Marcus watched Rosa's posture change, shoulders tensing as she prepared for confrontation. "I stocked it myself before I left Friday night, Mr. Sullivan. Everything was full." "Well, something was wrong. Maybe you need to pay better attention to detail, or maybe that accent of yours makes it hard to read the supply lists."
The casual cruelty of the comment hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was exactly what the HR reports had described: harassment disguised as performance feedback, discrimination dressed up as management concerns. Rosa's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "I understand, Mr. Sullivan. I'll double-check everything tonight." "See that you do. And Rosa," Sullivan's voice carried a warning, "I've been getting feedback about your attitude lately. Might be time to remember that there's plenty of people who'd like to have your job." After Sullivan left, Rosa sat in silence for several minutes, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped coffee from a thermos marked with her daughter's school logo. "You okay?" Marcus asked gently. "Just another day at paradise," Rosa replied, but Marcus could hear the exhaustion in her voice. 15 years I've been cleaning offices, Mike. Never had complaints about my work until Mr. Sullivan took over the department. Now everything I do is wrong, and somehow it's always connected to where I'm from or how I talk." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, but forced himself to respond as Mike Thompson would, not as the company's owner. "That's not right. You're the best worker I've seen so far." "Doesn't matter what's right," Rosa said softly. "Matters what you can prove. And managers like Sullivan, they know exactly how to make your life miserable without leaving fingerprints." The rest of the shift passed quietly, but Marcus found himself studying every interaction, every dynamic between workers and management. He met David Chen, an earnest young man who was working nights to put himself through engineering school, and watched Sullivan treat him with the same casual disrespect he'd shown Rosa. He observed Tom Bradley, the night security guard, who clearly sympathized with the cleaning crew, but seemed constrained by his own position in the building's hierarchy. By 6:30 a.m., Marcus had completed his first shift as Mike Thompson. His back ached from unfamiliar physical labor, his hands were dry from cleaning chemicals, and his feet hurt from standing for 8 hours. But more than the physical discomfort was the psychological impact of being treated as invisible, of having his worth measured solely by his uniform and job title.
As the day shift began arriving, Marcus watched the transformation of the building from the workers' domain back to the executive's territory. Well-dressed managers swept through hallways that Rosa and David had spent the night perfecting, never acknowledging the people who made their comfortable work environment possible. Rosa walked with him toward the employee exit, both of them tired but satisfied with a night's work completed professionally. "You did good tonight, Mike. This job isn't glamorous, but it's honest work. Just keep your head down and don't let Sullivan get to you. Men like him, they feed on making others feel small." Marcus watched Rosa walk to her aging Honda Civic, noting how she moved with quiet dignity despite everything she had endured that night. As he climbed into his own carefully chosen older model sedan, he felt the weight of what he had witnessed and experienced. This wasn't just about HR violations or legal liability. This was about human beings who deserved better from the company that employed them, who deserved better from the man who had built that company in their honor. Mike Thompson had learned more about Thompson Industries in one night than Marcus Thompson had discovered in 15 years of quarterly reports. By the end of his first week as Mike Thompson, Marcus had settled into the rhythm of the night shift. The physical demands became easier as his body adjusted to the unfamiliar labor, but the emotional challenges grew more complex with each passing day. He was discovering that his company had two completely different cultures: the corporate environment he knew intimately, and the service workers' world that operated in its shadows. The breakthrough in building genuine relationships came during his second week, when Rosa mentioned during their break that her daughter Sophia was struggling with calculus. "She's so smart, you know," Rosa said, showing Mike a picture on her phone of a serious-faced teenager with her mother's intelligent eyes. "But the math gets harder every year, and I can't help her anymore. We can't afford a tutor, and the teachers at her school, they're overwhelmed." Marcus felt his heart clench. He had built his empire on mathematical algorithms and engineering principles, had earned his way through MIT on scholarship by tutoring other students in advanced calculus. Without thinking, he responded with genuine enthusiasm. "I was pretty good at math in school. If she wanted to bring her homework around sometime, I could take a look. No charge, of course." Rosa's eyes widened with surprise. "You know calculus? Mike, most people who work jobs like ours—" I caught myself, realizing my mistake. "I got lucky with teachers, I guess. Had some college before life got in the way." That explanation seemed to satisfy Rosa, but Marcus could see her studying him with new interest, clearly noticing details about his speech patterns and knowledge that didn't quite fit the typical profile of a career janitor.
The arrangement began the following Thursday. Rosa brought Sophia to the building during their dinner break, a quiet girl with her mother's dignity and an obvious passion for learning. Marcus found a conference room on an empty floor where they could spread out textbooks and work through calculus problems. "You explain it differently than my teacher," Sophia said, after Marcus helped her understand derivatives using real-world examples. "Like you actually know why the math works, not just how to follow the rules." "Math tells stories," Marcus replied, falling into the natural teaching rhythm he'd once used in college. "Every equation is describing something about how the world works. When you understand the story, the rules make sense." Rosa watched from across the room, and Marcus could see her growing curiosity about this janitor who could teach college-level mathematics with the confidence of someone who truly understood it. It was during one of these tutoring sessions that David Chen joined them, having overheard their conversation about engineering principles. The young man was struggling with differential equations in his own coursework, and Marcus found himself naturally expanding the informal study group. "You could have been an engineer yourself, Mike," David observed, after Marcus had helped him through a particularly complex problem. "The way you think about systems and relationships, it's like you see the big picture that most people miss." "Different paths for different people," Marcus replied, but he could feel Rose's eyes on him, clearly noting the disconnect between his abilities and his circumstances. The relationships deepened over the following weeks.
Marcus learned that Rosa sent most of her paycheck to support her elderly mother back in Mexico, while saving every possible dollar for Sophia's college fund. David was carrying 18 credit hours while working full-time, sleeping 4 hours a night and subsisting on energy drinks and determination. Their stories reminded Marcus of his own younger selves, when every opportunity had to be fought for and nothing could be taken for granted. But it was during his third week that Marcus encountered Maria Santos, a day-shift janitor who occasionally worked overlap hours when special events required additional staffing. Maria was different from the other workers, more outspoken, less intimidated by management, with the kind of sharp political awareness that came from years of fighting for workers' rights. "You're the new night guy, right?" Maria said, cornering Marcus during a brief overlap period. "Rosa says you're decent, which matters around here." Marcus nodded, sensing that Maria was evaluating him for purposes he didn't yet understand. "Let me give you some free advice," Maria continued, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Document everything, every comment Sullivan makes, every time he treats someone differently because of their accent or skin color, every joke that isn't funny, every performance review that doesn't match reality." She pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with dates and detailed handwriting. 3 years I've been keeping records. HR says they can't act without concrete evidence, so I give them concrete evidence. The problem is they need witnesses willing to testify, and most people here can't afford to lose their jobs. Marcus studied the notebook, seeing Rosa's name mentioned multiple times, along with descriptions of incidents he had begun witnessing himself. "Why do you keep fighting? Wouldn't it be easier to just transfer to a different department?" Maria's expression hardened. "Because running away doesn't fix anything. My grandfather worked the steel mills, faced the same garbage from bosses who thought immigrant workers didn't deserve respect. You know what he used to tell me? 'Mija, you can't change the world by staying quiet.' Well, I'm not staying quiet." That night, Marcus found himself looking at his workplace with Maria's activist perspective. He noticed how Sullivan's behavior patterns became more obvious when viewed systematically. The facility manager consistently assigned the most difficult tasks to workers with accents, regularly questioned the work quality of Hispanic employees, while rarely checking the work of white staff members, and made casual comments about immigration status whenever he wanted to remind certain workers of their vulnerability. But Marcus also observed something that the HR reports hadn't captured: the way the affected workers had formed their own support network. Rosa mentored newer employees, helping them navigate Sullivan's moods and protecting them from the worst of his behavior. David shared textbooks and study materials with other students working their way through college. Tom Bradley, the security guard, quietly documented incidents on the building's camera system and provided informal protection for workers dealing with harassment. During a break in his 4th week, Marcus was eating a sandwich in the employee lounge when Rosa approached him with an expression of gentle confrontation. "Mike, can I ask you something personal?" Marcus felt his pulse quicken, wondering if his cover had been blown. "Sure. You don't have to answer if you don't want to," Rosa said, settling into the chair across from him. "But I've been watching you, listening to how you talk, seeing how you handle yourself. You're not like most people who end up working these jobs." "We all have our stories, Rosa. Sometimes life takes you places you didn't expect." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "That's true," she agreed, "but some people land in places temporarily, and other people land there permanently. You feel temporary to me, Mike, like someone who's passing through on his way to somewhere else." The observation was uncomfortably accurate, and Marcus realized that Rosa's wisdom and insight extended far beyond her formal education. She was reading him with the kind of intuitive intelligence that came from years of survival and observation. "Does it matter?" Marcus asked. Does it matter why someone's here, as long as they do good work and treat people right? Rosa smiled, and Marcus could see approval in her expression. No, it doesn't matter. What matters is character. And Mike, whatever your real story is, you've got good character. That's rare enough in this world. As Marcus prepared to leave at the end of his shift, he reflected on Rosa's words. In 4 weeks of undercover investigation, he had gathered substantial evidence of the discrimination and harassment that Jennifer's complaints had described. But more importantly, he had discovered something about his own company that quarterly reports could never reveal, that dignity and humanity existed at every level, maintained by people who deserved far better from their employer than they were receiving. The question was no longer whether Thompson Industries had a problem that needed to be addressed. The question was whether Marcus Thompson, in his role as Mike Thompson, would be able to maintain his cover long enough to gather the evidence needed to fix it permanently. But as he walked to his car in the parking garage, Marcus had the growing sense that his cover wasn't going to last much longer. Rosa was too intelligent, too observant, and too experienced at reading people. Soon he would have to choose between maintaining his investigation and protecting his relationships with the workers who had accepted Mike Thompson as one of their own. That choice was coming sooner than he expected. The shift in Sullivan's behavior came like a storm front moving across the lake. Marcus noticed it first in the way the facility manager's jaw tightened during their weekly staff meetings, how his eyes darted constantly to his phone, and the increasing frequency with which he disappeared into Frank Morrison's office for hushed conversations behind closed doors. It was Rosa who provided the context during their Thursday night break, speaking in the careful whisper of someone who had learned to recognize danger long before it arrived. "Building inspection next week," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with the kind of mechanical precision that meant her mind was elsewhere. Corporates sending people down from upstairs to check on maintenance standards. Sullivan's been getting pressure about our department's performance ratings. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement air conditioning. He knew about the inspection, had approved it himself weeks ago as part of a routine facilities audit. But from Mike Thompson's perspective, it was just another bureaucratic exercise that would make their lives more difficult. "What does that mean for us?" David asked, looking up from the engineering textbook he'd been studying during his break. "Means everything better be perfect," Rosa replied grimly. "And when everything isn't perfect, Sullivan's gonna need someone to blame." Her prediction proved accurate with devastating speed. By Monday night, Sullivan's behavior had transformed from casual disrespect to active aggression. He conducted surprise inspections of completed work areas, running his finger along baseboards and examining trash bins with the intensity of someone hunting for evidence of incompetence. "Rosa, get over here." Sullivan's voice cut through the quiet efficiency of the night shift like a knife. Marcus looked up from the supply cart he was restocking to see Rosa hurrying toward the executive washrooms on the 22nd floor, her expression already preparing for confrontation. Sullivan stood in the doorway of the men's washroom, pointing at a water spot on one of the mirrors with theatrical outrage. "You call this clean? Corporate inspection is in 3 days, and you're leaving water spots like some amateur?" Marcus moved closer, ostensibly to organize cleaning supplies, while actually positioning himself to witness the confrontation. What he saw made his hands clench involuntarily around the spray bottles he was carrying. "I cleaned that mirror myself an hour ago, Mr. Sullivan," Rosa said with careful dignity. "If there's a spot, it must have appeared after—" "Don't make excuses," Sullivan interrupted, stepping closer to Rosa in a way that was clearly designed to intimidate. "You know what your problem is? You people think good enough is good enough. But this is America, Rosa. In America, we have standards." The casual racism in the comment hit Marcus like a physical blow. The phrase "you people" carried decades of discriminatory weight, and Sullivan's emphasis on America was clearly intended to remind Rosa of her otherness, her vulnerability.
"I understand, Mr. Sullivan," Rosa replied, her voice steady despite the obvious stress. "I'll re-clean the entire washroom." "You'll re-clean this entire floor," Sullivan corrected, his voice rising enough to draw the attention of other workers. And you'll stay late tonight to make sure every surface meets inspection standards. Corporate finds problems, it's your job on the line. Marcus watched Rosa's shoulders sag slightly under the weight of the unfair punishment. Staying late meant missing her daughter's parent-teacher conference, disrupting carefully managed childcare arrangements, and working additional hours that might not even be compensated properly. David appeared at Marcus's elbow, his young face flushed with indignation. "That's not fair," he whispered. "Rosa's the most thorough cleaner we have. He's just using her as a scapegoat." Marcus nodded, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to intervene as the company's owner. But Mike Thompson had no authority here, no power to challenge Sullivan's behavior directly. All he could do was watch and document, and feel his anger build like pressure in a steam pipe. The situation escalated throughout the week. Sullivan found fault with David's work on the lobby windows, criticizing the young man's technique with personal insults disguised as professional feedback. Maybe if you spent less time with your nose in those books and more time learning how to actually work, you'd understand what quality looks like. Tom Bradley, the night security guard, approached Marcus during their Wednesday shift with obvious frustration written across his weathered face. "This ain't right, Mike," Tom said, glancing around to ensure Sullivan wasn't nearby. "I've been working security for 12 years, seen a lot of different managers come and go, but Sullivan's different. He enjoys making people suffer." Marcus studied Tom's expression, recognizing the moral conflict of someone who wanted to act but felt constrained by circumstances. Why doesn't anyone report him? Report him to who? Frank Morrison? Morrison is the one who hired Sullivan, promoted him, covers for him when complaints come in. Tom's voice carried the bitter wisdom of someone who had seen good people destroyed by bad systems. Workers like Rosa and David, they can't afford to make waves. They got families to feed, bills to pay. Sullivan knows that, uses it against them. What about you? You could document what's happening, provide witness statements. Tom's expression grew complicated. I've been thinking about that. Problem is, I'm close to retirement, got a pension to think about. But watching Sullivan tear these people down? He trailed off, clearly wrestling with competing loyalties. The breaking point came on Thursday night, during what should have been a routine floor maintenance session. Marcus was working alongside Rosa in the accounting department when Sullivan appeared without warning, his face flushed with anger and his movements carrying the aggressive energy of someone looking for a fight. "Rosa, I just got off the phone with Morrison. Corporate inspection got moved up to tomorrow morning, first thing." Rosa straightened, her cleaning rag still in her hands. "We'll be ready, Mr. Sullivan. Everything will be perfect." It better be, because if there's so much as a fingerprint on a window or a dust bunny under a desk, I'm holding you personally responsible. Sullivan stepped closer, invading Rosa's personal space in a way that made my muscles tense reflexively. "You understand me. Your job depends on this building being spotless." "Yes, sir," Rosa replied, but I could hear the strain in her voice. Sullivan wasn't finished. "And another thing, I've been hearing complaints about your attitude lately. Some of the day shift workers say you've been acting like you run this place, giving orders, thinking you're better than everyone else." Marcus knew this was a lie. He'd observed Rosa's interactions with other workers for weeks, had seen nothing but kindness and mentorship. Sullivan was manufacturing grievances to justify his harassment. "I don't understand, Mr. Sullivan. I'd try to help." That's exactly the problem. You try to help. You try to teach. You act like some kind of supervisor when you're nothing but a janitor. Maybe it's time you remembered your place. The words hit Rosa like physical blows, and Marcus watched her shrink back as if she'd been struck. This wasn't just professional criticism. This was a systematic attack on her dignity, her worth as a human being. David appeared at the doorway, drawn by Sullivan's raised voice, and Marcus could see the young man's hands trembling with suppressed outrage. Other workers had begun to gather, creating an audience for Rosa's humiliation. Sullivan seemed to feed off the attention, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. You know what I think, Rosa? I think you've gotten too comfortable here, too confident. Maybe you need a reminder that there's 100 other people who'd love to have your job. People who wouldn't question management, wouldn't act like they know better than their supervisors.
Marcus felt something break inside him. The careful control he'd maintained for weeks finally cracking under the weight of witnessed injustice. Rosa Martinez was one of the most hard-working, dignified people he'd ever encountered, and watching her be systematically destroyed for Sullivan's entertainment was more than he could bear. But before Marcus could move, before he could abandon his cover to defend Rosa, David stepped forward with the kind of moral courage that reminded Marcus why he'd built his company in the first place. "Mr. Sullivan, that's not fair," David said, his young voice shaking but determined. "Rosa's the best worker we have. She helps everyone, teaches people, makes sure everything gets done right. If there's a problem with the inspection, it won't be because of her." Sullivan's attention snapped to David like a predator identifying new prey. "Excuse me? Did I ask for your opinion?" "No, sir, but nothing. You're just as bad as she is, thinking you can question management decisions. Maybe both of you need to find work somewhere else." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire, and Marcus watched Rosa's face crumple as the reality of potential job loss hit her. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd endured to provide for her daughter was being threatened because a cruel man with a small amount of power had decided to make her life miserable. Marcus felt his cover story dissolving, felt Mike Thompson's careful invisibility evaporating under the heat of righteous anger. In moments like this, character revealed itself, regardless of circumstances. And Marcus Thompson had not built an empire by watching good people suffer in silence. The confrontation was far from over, and Marcus could sense that his weeks of careful investigation were about to collide with his fundamental inability to watch injustice unfold without acting. Rosa deserved better. David deserved better. Every worker in this building deserved better than what Sullivan was offering. And Marcus Thompson was about to make sure they got it. Friday night arrived with the weight of accumulated tension, like the atmospheric pressure that builds before a tornado touches down. Marcus had barely slept during the day, his mind churning through strategies and consequences, knowing that the corporate inspection scheduled for Monday morning had created a powder keg that Sullivan seemed determined to ignite. He arrived for his shift at 10:30 p.m. to find the facility's office in chaos. Sullivan was pacing behind the desk like a caged animal, his face flushed and his movements carrying the aggressive energy of someone who had been drinking. Papers were scattered across his workspace, and Marcus could smell alcohol on his breath from across the room. "About time," Sullivan snapped as Marcus signed in. "Where's Rosa?" "She called in sick," Tom Bradley said from his security station, his voice carefully neutral. "Said she had a family emergency." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. Rosa wasn't sick. She was protecting herself from what she sensed was coming. Her absence left the night crew short-staffed during the most critical cleaning shift before the inspection. "Family emergency," Sullivan repeated with vicious mockery. "Convenient timing. Well, she can explain her emergency to unemployment services, because when this inspection fails, she's gone." David appeared in the doorway, his usual nervous energy amplified by obvious stress. "Mr. Sullivan, I can work Rosa's section along with mine. I'll stay late, make sure everything is perfect." Sullivan's bloodshot eyes fixed on David with predatory focus. "Oh, you will you? The college boy's going to save the day." Marcus recognized the dangerous escalation in Sullivan's tone, the kind of aggressive unpredictability that came from alcohol and unchecked authority mixing into something toxic. "Yes, sir," David replied quietly. "Whatever needs to be done."
"What needs to be done," Sullivan said, stepping closer to David with deliberate intimidation, "is for people to remember their place. You think going to engineering school makes you special? You think it makes you better than the rest of us?" Marcus watched the confrontation unfold with growing alarm. Sullivan was drunk, angry, and looking for someone to blame for his own professional failures. David's earnest willingness to help had somehow triggered even deeper resentment. "No, sir," David said, backing toward the supply closet. "I just want to do good work." "Good work," Sullivan laughed bitterly. "You want to do good work? Here's some good work. You can scrub every toilet in this building with your bare hands. Maybe that'll teach you some humility." The deliberate humiliation in the assignment was designed to break David's spirit, to remind him that his education and ambitions meant nothing in Sullivan's domain. Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily, his carefully maintained cover identity straining under the pressure of witnessed cruelty. But Sullivan wasn't finished. As the shift progressed, he followed David from floor to floor, criticizing every task with increasingly personal attacks. "Maybe if you spent less time with your nose in those books, maybe if you understood what real work looks like, maybe if you weren't so eager to show off." By 2 a.m., David was visibly shaking, exhaustion and stress combining to wear down his natural resilience. Marcus found him in the stairwell between floors, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. "You okay?" Marcus asked, though the answer was obvious. "I need this job," David whispered. "My family's counting on me. My parents sacrificed everything so I could go to school, and if I lose this job—" Marcus sat beside him, recognizing his own younger self and David's desperate determination. "Sullivan's drunk. He's taking out his own problems on you. Doesn't matter. He can fire me whenever he wants, and we both know it." David looked up, his young face showing a maturity that came from understanding exactly how precarious his situation was. "People like us, we don't get second chances." The truth of that statement hit Marcus harder than any quarterly report ever had. David was right. People without safety nets, people working their way up from nothing, couldn't afford to fight back against abuse because the cost of losing was too high. At 3 a.m., Rosa appeared unexpectedly, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. She hadn't called in sick, she'd been at the hospital with her daughter, who had been in a minor car accident and needed someone to stay with her overnight. "Sophia's okay," she explained to Marcus while putting on her uniform. "Just shaken up, but I couldn't leave David to handle everything alone, not with the inspection tomorrow." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for Rosa's selflessness, followed immediately by dread about how Sullivan would react to her return. He didn't have to wait long to find out. Sullivan appeared in the break room like a storm cloud, his face twisted with alcohol-fueled rage. "Well, look who decided to show up. Had your little emergency, did you?" "My daughter was in an accident," Rosa replied with quiet dignity. "She needed me." "Your daughter," Sullivan repeated with vicious sarcasm. "Always something with your family, isn't it? Always some excuse for why you can't do your job properly." Marcus watched Rosa's posture change, her shoulders straightening as maternal protectiveness overrode her usual caution. "My daughter is not an excuse. She is my priority." "Your priority should be this job," Sullivan snarled, stepping into Rosa's personal space with threatening aggression. "The job that pays for your daughter's medical bills. The job that keeps a roof over both of your heads. The job that I can take away anytime I want." The threat was explicit now, delivered with the cruel pleasure of someone who enjoyed having power over vulnerable people. But Sullivan wasn't finished with his assault on Rosa's dignity. "You know what I think?" he continued, his voice carrying enough volume to draw attention from other workers. "I think you people come to this country thinking you deserve special treatment, thinking you can skip work whenever you feel like it and still get paid like real Americans." The racist attack landed like a physical blow.
and Marcus watched Rosa recoil as if she had been struck. The phrase, "you people," combined with questioning her Americanness, was designed to remind her of her vulnerability, her otherness, her expendability. "I am American," Rosa said quietly, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "I've lived here for 20 years. My daughter was born here." "Yeah, well, maybe it's time you both went back where you came from. I'm sure Mexico's got plenty of jobs for people who don't want to work." That was the moment that Marcus Thompson's carefully constructed cover identity finally shattered beyond repair. He had watched weeks of systematic harassment, documented countless instances of discriminatory behavior, and maintained his professional composure through increasingly difficult circumstances. But watching Sullivan attack Rosa's fundamental humanity while she was dealing with her daughter's injury crossed a line that Marcus simply could not allow to stand uncrossed. Mike Thompson would have stayed silent, would have kept his head down and his job secure. But Marcus Thompson had not built a billion-dollar empire by accepting injustice, and he had not spent weeks undercover just to watch a good woman be destroyed by a petty tyrant drunk on a small amount of power. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that had been missing from Mike Thompson's careful deference. Sullivan turned toward him with surprise, clearly not expecting intervention from another janitor. "What did you say?" He stepped forward, feeling years of careful self-presentation falling away as his true nature asserted itself. "That's enough. Rosa Martinez is one of the hardest-working, most professional people in this building. She doesn't deserve to be attacked for caring about her daughter." "Oh, we got another hero," Sullivan laughed. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. Something about Marcus's tone, his posture, his sudden transformation from invisible worker to confident challenger was throwing off Sullivan's usual dominance patterns. "Not a hero," Marcus replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Just someone who recognizes bullying when he sees it. And what you're doing to Rosa, to David, to every worker in this building, that's bullying, pure and simple." David had appeared in the doorway, drawn by raised voices, and Marcus could see the young man's amazement at watching someone finally stand up to Sullivan. "You want to know what real leadership looks like," Marcus continued, feeling the full weight of his true identity asserting itself. "Real leaders don't tear down the people who work for them. They don't attack someone's family or their heritage or their right to be here. Real leaders create environments where good people can succeed." Sullivan's face was cycling through confusion and rage, clearly recognizing that something had shifted fundamentally in the dynamic. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Marcus looked at Rosa, who was staring at him with growing recognition, clearly seeing past Mike Thompson's disguise to the person he actually was. He looked at David, whose expression showed wonder at watching someone refuse to be intimidated. He looked at Tom Bradley, who had appeared at the edge of the confrontation with his security radio in hand. "I'm someone who believes that every worker deserves dignity and respect," Marcus said, his voice carrying the conviction that had built Thompson Industries. "I'm someone who thinks Rosa Martinez is worth 10 of you, and I'm someone who's seen enough." Sullivan's face turned an alarming shade of red, alcohol and rage combining into something dangerous. "You're fired!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You're done! Get out of my building!" "This isn't your building," Marcus replied with quiet certainty, "and Rosa Martinez has more right to be here than you do." As security was called and Marcus was escorted toward the exit, he caught Rosa's eye one more time. The recognition in her expression was complete now, and he could see both gratitude and understanding in her face. Mike Thompson was leaving the building forever, but Marcus Thompson's work was just beginning. The corporate apartment that Marcus kept for late nights and early meetings had never felt more like a war room. At 4:30 a.m., still wearing Mike Thompson's janitor uniform, he sat at his kitchen table with his phone on speaker, Sarah's voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness with strategic precision. "Dad, tell me you didn't blow your cover by challenging Sullivan directly." Marcus ran a hand through his hair,
feeling the exhaustion of maintaining a false identity for weeks finally catching up to him. I couldn't just stand there and watch him attack Rosa like that. Sarah, if you had seen the look on her face when he told her to go back to Mexico. I understand the moral imperative, Sarah replied, her voice carrying both frustration and admiration. But now we need to move fast before Sullivan realizes who he actually fired. Jennifer's already on her way over with the legal team. Through the window, Marcus could see the first hints of dawn beginning to lighten the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in the city, Rosa was probably sitting in a hospital waiting room, holding vigil over her daughter, while worrying about the job that had just become exponentially more precarious. David was probably lying awake, wondering if his defense of Marcus had cost him his own employment. The knock on the door came at exactly 5 a.m. Jennifer Williams entered carrying 2 large briefcases and wearing the expression of someone who had been up all night preparing for corporate warfare. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked as she spread documents across his dining table. "Legally, we are in a strong position. Sullivan's behavior last night, combined with everything you witnessed over the past month, gives us grounds for immediate termination and potentially criminal charges for harassment and creating a hostile work environment." Jennifer opened her laptop, revealing screens full of documented incidents. "But there's a problem." Sarah, who had arrived 10 minutes behind Jennifer, looked up from the security footage she was reviewing on her tablet. "Let me guess, Sullivan's claiming Marcus attacked him?" "Worse," Jennifer replied grimly. "Sullivan has already called Frank Morrison, and they're preparing to spin this as a violent incident involving an unstable employee. They're saying Mike Thompson threatened Sullivan and had to be forcibly removed by security." Marcus felt anger flare again, but this time it was the cold, strategic anger of a CEO who had been challenged by incompetent subordinates. Tom Bradley was there. He saw everything. His security footage will show exactly what happened. "Tom's already been suspended pending investigation," Sarah said, consulting her phone. "Morrison is moving fast to control the narrative. They're treating this as a security breach that requires immediate damage control."
Jennifer pulled out a thick folder marked confidential. But here's what they don't know. Tom Bradley provided us with copies of security footage from the entire month before they could confiscate the official recordings. Every incident you witnessed, every confrontation, every instance of discriminatory behavior is documented. Marcus studied the screenshots Jennifer had printed, seeing his own face in the night vision security cameras as Mike Thompson defended Rosa against Sullivan's attack. The footage was clear, unmistakable evidence of who had actually instigated the confrontation. "What about Rosa and David? Are they going to face retaliation?" "That's our first priority," Sarah replied. "We're offering them both immediate transfers to different departments with full pay protection while the investigation proceeds. But Dad, we need to move carefully here. If Sullivan realizes he fired the company owner, this becomes a much bigger legal and PR nightmare." Jennifer opened her laptop to a comprehensive timeline she had been building throughout the night. "Here's the plan. At 8 a.m., I'm calling an emergency meeting with Frank Morrison and Brad Sullivan. I'm going to present them with documented evidence of systematic harassment and discrimination, along with video proof of last night's incident." "Without revealing my identity?" Marcus asked. "Initially, yes. We'll present it as the result of our ongoing internal investigation, with Mike Thompson as a confidential witness whose identity must be protected. We'll give them one chance to do the right thing, terminate Sullivan immediately, and implement comprehensive policy changes." Sarah continued the strategic outline. "If they refuse, or if they try to retaliate against any of the affected workers, then we reveal the truth. Marcus Thompson, CEO and owner of the company, was personally subjected to discriminatory treatment and witnessed systematic harassment of employees." Marcus stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city where thousands of workers were beginning their daily commutes. In a few hours, some of them would arrive at Thompson Industries, clocking in for jobs where they deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. "There's something else," Jennifer said quietly. "Rosa Martinez called me 20 minutes ago."
Marcus turned, feeling his pulse quicken. "Is Sophia okay?" "Sophia's fine, but Rosa wanted me to know that she figured out who Mike Thompson really is." Jennifer's expression grew complicated. "She said she's known for at least a week, maybe longer. Said the way you explained calculus to her daughter, the way you talked about business principles, the way you carried yourself when you thought no one was watching, it all added up." "Did she tell anyone else?" "No, but she wanted to thank you. Said she's never had someone with real power stand up for her before." She paused, consulting her notes. "She also said she's willing to testify about everything she's witnessed, regardless of the consequences." Sarah looked up from her tablet with obvious admiration. "Rosa Martinez sounds like exactly the kind of person we want representing Thompson Industries' values." "She is," Marcus replied with certainty. "They all are. Rosa, David, Tom Bradley, even Maria Santos with her documentation skills. These are the people who should be leading our facilities department." Jennifer made notes as Marcus spoke. "What are you thinking?" Marcus felt the pieces of a larger plan beginning to crystallize in his mind. This wasn't just about firing Sullivan and Morrison. This was about fundamentally changing how Thompson Industries treated its workers at every level. "I'm thinking that when this is over, we're not just replacing bad managers, we're promoting the people who've shown real leadership under impossible circumstances. Rosa Martinez has been the de facto supervisor of that night crew for months. Let's make it official. David Chen has shown more integrity and courage than most executives I know. Let's give him opportunities that match his character." Jennifer was typing rapidly, capturing the strategic direction. "The board will need to approve major organizational changes." "The board will approve whatever I recommend when they see the evidence of what we've uncovered," Marcus replied with quiet confidence. "And if they don't, I'll remind them who owns the controlling interest in this company." At 6 a.m., as the sun began to rise over Chicago, Marcus Thompson prepared to transform from undercover janitor back into the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation. But the man putting on an expensive suit was not the same person who entered that building weeks ago as Mike Thompson.
He had learned what it meant to be invisible in his own company. He had experienced the vulnerability of depending on others for basic respect and dignity. He had witnessed the courage of workers who fought for justice despite having everything to lose. Most importantly, he had discovered that the most valuable people in his organization weren't the ones in the executive offices. They were the ones cleaning those offices, maintaining the building, keeping the infrastructure running while being treated as expendable. That was about to change, permanently and systematically. Sullivan and Morrison had no idea that their world was about to be turned upside down by the janitor they had just fired. But they were going to learn, very quickly, that actions have consequences, and that the most dangerous person in any organization is someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The confrontation they had been building toward was finally at hand. Monday morning arrived at Thompson Industries with the crisp efficiency of a military operation. By 7:30 a.m., word had spread through the building's corridors like electricity through copper wire. The mysterious company founder was finally making an appearance. Employees gathered in clusters near windows and elevator banks, craning their necks for a glimpse of the legendary Marcus Thompson, the man who had built their billion-dollar empire from nothing, but was rarely seen in person. In the executive parking garage, a convoy of black sedans discharged their passengers with choreographed precision. Marcus emerged from the lead vehicle wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most employees made in a month. Flanked by Sarah, Jennifer Williams, and a team of corporate attorneys whose presence suggested that this was not a routine visit. The transformation from Mike Thompson, night janitor, to Marcus Thompson, CEO and owner, was complete and dramatic. Gone was the hunched posture and deferential manner of the service worker. In their place stood a man whose bearing radiated the quiet authority that came from building something significant and knowing exactly how to protect it. "Remember, we give them one chance to do the right thing," Jennifer murmured as they approached the main elevator bank. "If they take responsibility and implement immediate changes, we can handle this internally." "And if they don't?" asked Sarah, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Marcus's smile was cold as winter wind off Lake Michigan. Then they learned what it feels like to be fired by the person they thought was just a janitor. The elevator ride to the facilities management offices was conducted in the kind of tense silence that preceded significant corporate battles. Marcus found himself thinking about Rosa, who was probably at the hospital with Sophia, worrying about whether she still had a job. About David, who was likely sitting in some lecture hall trying to focus on differential equations while wondering if his defense of a coworker had destroyed his future. The facilities department occupied a corner of the building's third floor, far enough from the executive offices to maintain the illusion that the people who cleaned the building were somehow separate from the people who ran it. Marcus had walked these hallways as Mike Thompson just hours earlier, invisible and powerless. Now he returned with the full authority of ownership and a comprehensive plan for institutional change. Frank Morrison was waiting in the conference room with the nervous energy of a middle manager who sensed disaster approaching but couldn't identify its source. At 58, Morrison had spent his entire career avoiding conflict and maintaining the status quo, skills that had served him well until this morning. "Mr. Thompson," Morrison said, rising awkwardly as the executive team entered, "this is unexpected. I wasn't aware you were planning to visit our department." "There are a lot of things you haven't been aware of, Frank," Marcus replied, taking a seat at the head of the conference table with the casual authority of someone accustomed to command. "Where's Brad Sullivan?" "Sullivan's handling some paperwork in his office. There was an incident with one of our night staff over the weekend, a terminated employee who became aggressive and had to be removed by security." Marcus felt a surge of dark amusement. Sullivan was probably crafting his version of events, creating a narrative that painted Mike Thompson as an unstable troublemaker rather than a whistleblower who had witnessed months of systematic harassment. "Call him in," Marcus said simply. "This meeting concerns him directly." Morrison's face grew pale as he made the phone call, clearly sensing that whatever was about to happen would not be good for his department or his career. Sullivan appeared 5 minutes later, swagger intact, clearly unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down by the janitor they had just fired. He had spent the weekend celebrating his perceived victory over the troublemaking janitor, probably bragging to friends about how he'd put another uppity worker in his place. "Mr. Thompson," Sullivan said with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from believing he was untouchable, "Frank said you wanted to discuss the security incident from Friday night." "Sit down, Brad," Marcus replied, his voice carrying undertones that made Sullivan's expression flicker with the first hint of uncertainty. Jennifer opened her briefcase with theatrical precision, removing a stack of documents that represented weeks of careful investigation and documentation. The security footage screenshots were arranged chronologically, showing Sullivan's escalating harassment campaign in devastating detail. "Gentlemen, we're here to discuss a pattern of discriminatory behavior, hostile work environment violations, and systematic harassment of employees based on race, national origin, and immigration status," Jennifer began, her professional tone carrying the weight of legal authority. Morrison's face drained of color as he recognized the seriousness of the accusations. Sullivan, however, maintained his defensive posture, clearly prepared to deny everything and shift blame to subordinates. "I don't know what lies you've been told," Sullivan said, his voice rising with indignation. "But if this is about that troublemaker we fired Friday night, he was unstable, threatened me physically. We had to call security to remove him."
Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Sullivan with the kind of clinical interest a scientist might show when observing a particularly toxic specimen. "Tell me about Mike Thompson, Brad. What made him so troublesome?" Sullivan's confidence grew as he launched into his prepared narrative. New hire, acted like he was better than everyone else, questioned management decisions, stirred up trouble among the other workers. Friday night, he completely lost it when I tried to correct some performance issues with Rosa Martinez. "Rosa Martinez," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me about these performance issues." "She's been letting her personal problems affect her work quality. Missing shifts, showing attitude when given constructive criticism. Friday, she came in late after claiming some family emergency, then got defensive when I pointed out the impact on our inspection readiness." Jennifer placed a photograph on the table, a security camera screenshot showing Sullivan standing inches from Rose's face, his finger pointed at her chest in a threatening gesture. "Is this your definition of constructive criticism, Mr. Sullivan?" Sullivan glanced at the image, and Marcus could see the moment when recognition dawned that someone had been watching, documenting, building a case against him. "That's taken out of context," Sullivan stammered. "You can't judge a management interaction based on a single photograph." Sarah placed her tablet on the table, the screen showing a paused video file. "Then perhaps you'd prefer to see it in motion, with audio." The color drained from Sullivan's face as he realized the full scope of what had been captured. Morrison leaned forward, squinting at the timestamp on the video with growing alarm. "This recording shows you threatening Rosa Martinez's employment, questioning her right to be in this country, and suggesting she should go back to Mexico," Jennifer continued with prosecutorial precision. "Would you like to explain how that constitutes appropriate workplace supervision?" Sullivan's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, his prepared defenses crumbling as he realized that his careful pattern of harassment had been thoroughly documented. "Furthermore," Jennifer continued, placing additional photographs on the table, "we have evidence of systematic discriminatory treatment, including different performance standards based on race and national origin, retaliation against employees who file complaints, and the creation of a hostile work environment that violates both company policy and federal law." Morrison found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. How long has this investigation been going on?" Marcus smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. "Long enough to understand exactly what's been happening in this department, Frank. Long enough to witness firsthand how your employees are treated by their supervisors." "Firsthand?" Sullivan asked, confusion mixing with growing panic in his voice. Marcus stood, moving to the window that overlooked the building's main entrance. Far below, he could see employees arriving for their Monday shifts, people who deserved better from their employer than what Sullivan and Morrison had been providing. "You see, Brad, when we started receiving complaints about discrimination and harassment in this department, we decided to conduct a thorough investigation. Not just interviews and paperwork reviews, but actual observation of how management treats workers when they think no one important is watching." Sullivan's breathing grew shallow as pieces began falling into place in his mind, though he clearly couldn't yet believe what he was beginning to suspect. "For the past month, we've had an undercover investigator working in this department, documenting every interaction, every policy violation, every instance of discriminatory treatment." Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Mike Thompson," Sullivan whispered, the name falling from his lips like a curse. Marcus turned from the window, fixing Sullivan with the full force of his attention. Mike Thompson was very thorough in his reports. Every conversation, every confrontation, every time you told a hard-working employee that they should go back where they came from.
The room fell silent, except for the sound of Sullivan's labored breathing as the full magnitude of his situation finally penetrated his understanding. Morrison's voice came out as a croak. "You're saying
Mike Thompson was working for corporate? Mike Thompson, Marcus said with quiet satisfaction, was working for me personally. In fact, you might say Mike Thompson was me. Sullivan's face cycled through disbelief, recognition, and dawning horror as he finally understood who he had been harassing, intimidating, and ultimately firing over the last month. You see, gentlemen, Marcus continued, settling back into his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone holding all the cards. I've learned that the only way to truly understand what's happening in your organization is to experience it yourself. And what I experienced in this department was unacceptable. The silence stretched until Sullivan finally found his voice. You can't. This is entrapment. You can't fire someone for doing their job as they see fit. Marcus's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Brad, you didn't fire an employee for insubordination. You fired the owner of this company for standing up to your bullying. And now you're going to learn what real consequences look like. The confrontation Marcus had been building toward for weeks was finally at hand, and Sullivan was about to discover that actions truly do have consequences. The conference room fell into the kind of absolute silence that precedes earthquakes. Sullivan's face had gone through several color changes, red to white to gray to a sickly green that suggested his breakfast was threatening to make a reappearance. Morrison sat frozen in his chair, like a man watching his entire career collapse in real time. Marcus allowed the silence to stretch, letting the full weight of revelation settle over both men. He had learned during his weeks as Mike Thompson that power was most effective when wielded with precision rather than volume. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly, Brad," Marcus said, his voice carrying the deadly calm of someone completely in control. "You spent the last month harassing, intimidating, and discriminating against employees under the assumption that no one with any real authority would ever witness your behavior." Sullivan's mouth moved soundlessly, his prepared defenses having evaporated the moment he understood who Mike Thompson actually was. "You told Rosa Martinez, one of our most dedicated employees, to go back to Mexico. You assigned degrading tasks to David Chen specifically to humiliate him for pursuing an education. You created a hostile work environment based on race and national origin, then covered it up by retaliating against anyone brave enough to complain." Jennifer placed a thick legal document on the table with the kind of ceremonial gravity usually reserved for treaty signings. "Mr. Sullivan, this is your termination notice, effective immediately. You're being dismissed for cause due to violation of company harassment policies, creation of a hostile work environment, and discriminatory practices based on protected characteristics." Sullivan finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate croak. "You can't. This is entrapment. You can't fire someone for doing their job as they see fit." Marcus's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Your job, Mr. Sullivan, was to manage facilities maintenance, not to terrorize employees. Your job was to ensure a professional work environment, not to question people's right to be in this country. Your job was to treat all workers with dignity and respect, not to use your position as a weapon against people you considered beneath you." Morrison cleared his throat, clearly desperate to distance himself from Sullivan's sinking ship. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that I was completely unaware of these irregularities. If I had known about Mr. Sullivan's behavior, I would have taken immediate action. The lie hung in the air like smoke from a fire, and Marcus felt his anger sharpen to a laser focus. Morrison's willful ignorance had enabled Sullivan's harassment for years, and his attempt to claim innocence was perhaps more insulting than Sullivan's open hostility. "Let me share something I learned during my time as Mike Thompson," Marcus said, pulling out his own documentation from the past month. "I learned that there are two kinds of managers who allow harassment to flourish. There are the Brad Sullivans, who actively create toxic environments because they enjoy having power over vulnerable people." He fixed Morrison with a stare that could have frozen Lake Michigan. "And then there are the Frank Morrisons, who enable harassment through cowardice and willful blindness, who turn away when they see discrimination because addressing it might create conflict, who prioritize their own comfort over their employees' safety." Morrison's face went pale as he realized that his strategy of claiming innocence was not going to save his career.
Maria Santos documented 17 separate incidents over the past 6 months where you were present when Sullivan made discriminatory comments or engaged in harassment, Jennifer added, consulting her notes. In each case, you either ignored the behavior or actively discouraged the victims from filing complaints. I was trying to handle things quietly, internally, Morrison stammered. I thought if I could work with Brad to improve his management style. You thought wrong, Marcus replied with finality. Your termination is also effective immediately. The double termination hit Morrison like a physical blow, and he slumped in his chair as the reality of losing his pension-eligible position just a few years before retirement sank in. But Marcus wasn't finished. The weeks of witnessing injustice had built up pressure that required complete release. "Let me tell you what else I learned as Mike Thompson," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I learned that the most valuable people in this organization aren't sitting in corner offices. They're mopping floors and emptying trash cans while being treated like they're invisible." He stood and began pacing, the energy of righteous anger finally finding its outlet. Rosa Martinez has been the unofficial supervisor of the night crew for years, solving problems, training new employees, and maintaining standards that you two couldn't even recognize. David Chen shows more integrity and work ethic in a single shift than most executives demonstrate in a year. Tom Bradley has been protecting vulnerable workers from your harassment while maintaining his professional responsibilities despite pressure to look the other way. Sullivan made one last desperate attempt at deflection. "This is reverse discrimination. You're firing white employees to protect minorities. Your lawyer will explain to you why discriminatory harassment is illegal regardless of who's doing it," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through Sullivan's protests like a blade. "And if you attempt to portray yourself as the victim in this situation, we'll release the full security footage to demonstrate exactly what kind of management you were providing." Marcus returned to his seat, feeling the satisfaction that came from finally being able to use his power for its intended purpose, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice returning to the calm authority that had built Thompson Industries. "This investigation doesn't end with your terminations. We're conducting a comprehensive review of every department, every manager, every policy that might allow this kind of systematic harassment to flourish." Jennifer opened another folder, revealing organizational charts and policy documents. Effective immediately, Thompson Industries is implementing new anti-discrimination training for all management personnel, establishing an independent ombudsman for employee complaints, and creating clear pathways for reporting harassment without fear of retaliation. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "we're promoting employees who have demonstrated real leadership under adverse circumstances. Rosa Martinez is being promoted to facility supervisor with full management authority and a salary commensurate with her actual contributions. David Chen is being transferred to our engineering department with tuition assistance to complete his degree. Tom Bradley is becoming our Director of Employee Relations with a mandate to ensure that every worker in this building is treated with dignity and respect. The comprehensiveness of the changes clearly stunned both terminated managers, who had expected at most a reprimand and policy adjustment. "This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness," Marcus said, addressing Sullivan directly. "You thought Rosa Martinez was powerless because she cleaned offices. You thought David Chen was insignificant because he was young and working his way through school. You thought Mike Thompson was just another janitor you could push around." He leaned forward, his voice growing deadly quiet. "What you failed to understand is that in my company, character matters more than hierarchy. The people you were tormenting represent everything Thompson Industries was built to support: hard work, integrity, dedication to excellence, and the belief that everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed." Security personnel appeared in the doorway, clearly summoned by some prearranged signal. Their presence announced that the conversation phase of the morning was officially over. "Gentlemen, you have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings under security supervision," Jennifer announced with administrative finality. "All company property, including computers, phones, and access badges, will remain with the company. HR will contact you regarding final paycheck processing and COBRA continuation." As Sullivan and Morrison were escorted from the conference room like prisoners being led to their cells, Marcus felt the weight of justice finally being served. The investigation that had begun with anonymous complaints had ended with comprehensive institutional change. But more than that, it had ended with the validation of every worker who had ever been told they didn't matter, that their dignity was expendable, that their place in the world was determined by the uniform they wore rather than the character they demonstrated. The transformation of Thompson Industries from a company that tolerated harassment into one that actively prevented it was about to begin. The executive elevator carried Marcus and his team back to the 42nd floor in contemplative silence. Through the glass walls, they could see Sullivan and Morrison being escorted through the lobby by security, carrying cardboard boxes that represented the end of their careers at Thompson Industries. Employees throughout the building watched the proceedings with obvious curiosity, clearly sensing that something significant had just occurred. "Phase 1 complete," Jennifer said, as they entered Marcus's office. "What's our timeline for the broader changes?" Marcus moved to his window, looking down at the city where thousands of workers were starting another day, hoping to be treated with basic dignity and respect. "How quickly can we reach Rosa, David, and Tom? I want them to hear about the changes directly from us, not through building gossip." Sarah was already dialing numbers on her phone. "Rosa's at the hospital with Sophia. David's in class until noon. Tom's probably sleeping after working the night shift, but I can reach him." "Hospital first," Marcus decided. "Rosa needs to know that defending her dignity cost me nothing, but standing up for her has changed everything." An hour later, Marcus found himself in an unexpected setting, the family waiting area of Chicago General Hospital, still wearing his expensive suit, but sitting in plastic chairs designed for people who couldn't afford private health care. Rosa looked up from the magazine she'd been reading, her expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been relief. "Sophia's fine," she said quickly, clearly assuming Marcus had come because of some work emergency. "The doctor says she can go home this afternoon. I know I missed my shift, but—" "Rosa, stop," Marcus interrupted gently. "I'm not here about your shift. I'm here to tell you what's happened since Friday night." He explained the morning's events in careful detail: Sullivan's termination, Morrison's dismissal, the comprehensive policy changes that would prevent future harassment. But more importantly, he explained Rosa's promotion to facilities supervisor, with full management authority and a salary that reflected her actual contributions to the organization. Rosa listened in stunned silence, her hands trembling slightly as the magnitude of the changes sank in. "I don't understand. Mike, you're really the owner of the company?" "I'm really Marcus Thompson.
And Rosa, you're really the person who should have been running that department all along. Friday night when Sullivan attacked you, when he told you to go back to Mexico, he wasn't just attacking an employee. He was attacking someone who represents everything Thompson Industries was built to support. Tears began streaming down Rosa's face, and Marcus recognized them as the kind of tears that came from years of suppressed dignity finally being acknowledged. 20 years I've worked cleaning offices, 20 years of being invisible, of managers acting like I don't exist or don't matter. And you saw me. You stood up for me. You were never invisible, Rosa. People like Sullivan just refused to see you because acknowledging your worth would have required them to admit their own failures. Now you're going to have the authority to make sure no one else has to experience what you've been through. The conversation with David Chen took place in the engineering building at his university, where Marcus found the young man between classes, still wearing his work uniform under a donated winter coat. David's reaction to the news was characteristically thoughtful. He wanted to understand not just what had happened, but why it mattered for other students in similar situations. Mr. Chen, Marcus, this means other people working their way through school won't have to choose between defending what's right and keeping their jobs? That's exactly what it means. And David, your transfer to the engineering department isn't charity. It's recognition that character and intelligence matter more than circumstances. You've earned this opportunity through your work ethic and your courage. Tom Bradley was the most difficult conversation, not because he was resistant to change, but because his military background made him deeply uncomfortable with being rewarded for what he considered simply doing his duty. Sir, I was just documenting what I witnessed. Any decent person would have done the same thing. Tom, that's exactly the point. Any decent person would have done what you did, but most people in your position would have been too scared or too comfortable to risk their security for principle. That's what makes you the right person to ensure employee safety going forward. By late afternoon, news of the morning's dramatic changes had spread throughout Thompson Industries with the speed of corporate wildfire. Employees gathered in break rooms and hallways, sharing rumors and speculation about the mysterious undercover investigation and the subsequent management shakeup. Jennifer had spent the day conducting emergency meetings with department heads, explaining the new anti-discrimination policies and making it clear that the tolerance for harassment had permanently ended. Sarah coordinated with legal to ensure that all documentation was properly filed and that the terminated managers couldn't claim procedural violations.
But the most significant meeting of the day took place at 4 p.m. in the building's main auditorium, where Marcus addressed the entire staff for the first time in his company's history. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with employees standing along the walls and crowding the doorways to hear directly from the legendary founder who had built their workplace from nothing. Marcus looked out at faces that represented every level of the organization: executives and janitors, engineers and security guards, people of every race and background who made Thompson Industries function. 3 weeks ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system, I received reports that some employees were being subjected to harassment and discrimination. Rather than simply conducting interviews and reviewing policies, I decided to experience our workplace culture firsthand. A murmur ran through the audience as people began to understand the scope of what he was revealing. For the past month, I worked the night shift as a janitor named Mike Thompson. I cleaned offices, emptied trash, mopped floors, and learned what it means to be judged by your uniform rather than your character. The murmur grew to excited conversation as employees processed the dramatic revelation that their CEO had been working among them anonymously. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. What I discovered was that we had allowed a culture of discrimination to flourish in the shadows. Managers who abused their authority, who treated certain employees as expendable based on their race or accent or immigration status. But I also discovered something else.
that the most valuable people in this organization aren't necessarily the ones with corner offices. They're the people who show up every day, do excellent work, and treat their colleagues with dignity and respect, regardless of position. He gestured toward the side of the auditorium where Rosa, David, and Tom sat with obvious discomfort at being the center of attention. Rosa Martinez has been promoted to facility supervisor because she's already been doing the job better than the person who held the title. David Chen is joining our engineering department because talent and character deserve opportunity. Tom Bradley is our new Director of Employee Relations because protecting vulnerable workers is what leadership actually looks like. The applause that followed was sustained and genuine, led by employees who had witnessed the promoted workers' integrity firsthand. This is not the end of our changes, it's the beginning. Thompson Industries was built on the principle that everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed through hard work and dedication. Any manager who forgets that principle will find themselves looking for work elsewhere. Any employee who experiences harassment or discrimination now has multiple channels to report it without fear of retaliation. As the applause died down, Marcus felt the satisfaction that came from using power for its intended purpose. The company he had built would now actively protect the people who made it successful, rather than simply tolerating their mistreatment. But more than institutional change, he had learned something about himself through his weeks as Mike Thompson. True leadership wasn't about commanding from a distance. It was about understanding the experiences of everyone who contributed to the organization's success. The transformation of Thompson Industries, from a company that tolerated harassment into one that actively prevented it, was complete. All that remained was ensuring that the changes would last long after the drama of the investigation had faded into corporate history. 3 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in the same basement facilities office where he had first met Rosa Martinez as Mike Thompson, the nervous new janitor who didn't know how to properly fold a mop cloth. The space had been transformed as completely as the culture it represented. Gone were the cramped metal desks and flickering fluorescent lights. In their place stood a modern employee center with comfortable seating, updated equipment, and motivational posters that actually meant something because they were backed by real policy changes. Rosa emerged from her new supervisor's office wearing a crisp navy blazer with "Facilities Supervisor" embroidered in gold thread. The transformation in her bearing was remarkable. Shoulders back, eyes bright with confidence, moving with the authority of someone whose worth had finally been recognized and rewarded. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending her hand with professional warmth. "Ready for the tour?" Marcus smiled, remembering how she had once called him Mike and shown him where they kept the industrial cleaning supplies. "Lead the way, Supervisor Martinez." They walked through floors that gleamed with the kind of attention to detail that came from workers who took pride in their jobs rather than fear their supervisors. The night crew, now expanded to include several new hires, moved through their tasks with quiet efficiency under Rose's fair but exacting leadership. "How's Sophia doing?" Marcus asked as they entered the same break room where he had once tutored calculus while disguised as a janitor.
Rose's face lit up with maternal pride. "On a roll again this semester. She wants to study pre-med next year, says she wants to help people the way you helped us." Her expression grew more serious. "She asks about Mike Thompson sometimes, says she misses having a tutor who made math make sense." "Mike Thompson was just me trying to understand my own company better," Marcus replied. "But the tutoring part was real. If Sophia ever needs help with advanced mathematics, she knows where to find me." They continued the tour, visiting David Chen's new workspace in the engineering department. The young man had thrown himself into his new role with the same intensity he'd once applied to mopping floors and studying differential equations.
His desk was covered with technical drawings and computer printouts, evidence of projects that would have been impossible when he was working nights just to survive. "David's already submitted 3 improvement proposals for our HVAC systems," Rosa noted with obvious pride. "Turns out someone who's actually worked in every part of this building understands how to make it function better." Tom Bradley's office occupied a corner of the human resources floor, its windows overlooking the employee parking garage, where Rosa still drove her aging Honda Civic, though now she could afford the repairs it needed. Tom had embraced his new role as Director of Employee Relations with the same methodical dedication he'd once applied to security rounds. "0 harassment complaints in the past 90 days, Tom reported during their brief meeting. "But more importantly, we've had 47 commendations submitted by employees recognizing colleagues for exceptional treatment and support." Marcus nodded, understanding that the absence of complaints was less important than the presence of positive recognition. Thompson Industries was becoming the kind of workplace where people celebrated each other's successes rather than simply enduring each other's presence. The tour concluded in Marcus's office, where he stood once again at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. But his perspective had changed fundamentally. Where he had once seen an abstract cityscape representing market opportunities and competitive advantages, he now saw individual lives. People heading home to families after jobs where they were treated with dignity. Workers whose potential was recognized rather than suppressed. "There's something I want to show you," Rosa said, pulling out her phone. The screen displayed a photograph of a young woman in hospital scrubs, beaming beside a patient who was clearly recovering from some medical procedure. "That's Sophia, first day of her volunteer work at Children's Memorial. She says watching you stand up for what's right taught her that she wants to spend her life helping people who can't help themselves." Marcus studied the photograph, seeing in Sophia's expression the same quiet determination that had made Rosa such an exceptional employee despite years of systematic mistreatment. "Rosa, can I ask you something? When did you first suspect that Mike Thompson wasn't really just another janitor?" Rosa smiled, the expression carrying years of hard-earned wisdom. "About the second week. The way you explained calculus to Sophia like you'd been teaching it for years, the way you talked about business systems like you understood them from the inside. But mostly, it was how you treated people." "How so?" "Most people who work jobs like cleaning, they understand what it means to be invisible. They know how to keep their heads down, avoid attracting attention from management. But you, even as Mike, you had this way of seeing people, really seeing them, like everyone mattered to you personally. I suppose that's what this whole experience taught me, that everyone does matter personally. Every person who works here has a story, has dreams, has dignity that deserves to be respected, regardless of what uniform they wear." 6 months after the investigation, Marcus instituted quarterly perspective visits to different departments throughout Thompson Industries. Not undercover operations, but genuine attempts to understand the experiences of employees at every level. The practice spread to other companies as word of Thompson Industries' transformation became a case study in business schools across the country. The final validation came in an unexpected form, a handwritten letter that arrived at Marcus's office on a Tuesday morning in spring. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it began in careful script, "my name is Carlos Mendoza. I just started working night shift in your building. Rosa Martinez is my supervisor, and she told me the story about how you worked alongside her as Mike Thompson, how you stood up for her when someone tried to make her feel like she didn't belong. I wanted you to know that having a supervisor like Rosa, working for a company where people are treated with respect regardless of their background, it means everything to my family. My son is studying engineering just like David Chen did. Knowing that character matters more than circumstances in your company gives us hope for his future. Thank you for proving that there are still bosses who remember what it was like to work hard for every opportunity. Sincerely, Carlos Mendoza." Marcus placed the letter carefully in his desk drawer, next to his father's vintage pocket watch and the original janitorial uniform he'd worn as Mike Thompson. Some reminders were worth keeping permanently. The transformation of Thompson Industries was complete, but its impact extended far beyond quarterly profit reports or employee satisfaction surveys. It had created a workplace where dignity was non-negotiable, where character determined advancement, and where standing up for what's right was rewarded rather than punished. Most importantly, it had proven that sometimes the most powerful people in the world become truly powerful only when they're willing to become temporarily invisible, to walk in someone else's shoes, and to remember that respect and kindness matter more than hierarchy. Marcus Thompson had built a billion-dollar empire, but Mike Thompson had learned what made it worth building. The story ended where it began, with the understanding that true success is measured not by what you accumulate, but how you treat the people who help you succeed. And in that measure, Thompson Industries had finally become the company it was always meant to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.